Industry, foreign trade and foreign capital since 1990. Friends, let me introduce you to the topic. Most of the underdeveloped countries suffer from the low level of income and low level of capital accumulation. However, despite this shortage of capital, these countries have developed a strong urge for industrialization and economic development. India launched upon a program of industrialization during the second plan under Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956. Due to such state-controlled system of licenses, the domestic resources to carry out this program were insufficient. The country had to depend on foreign capital. First topic is industry. New industrial policy was announced by the Government of India in July 1991. The new policy contained policy directions for reforms in the sphere of liberalization, privatization and globalization, popularly known as LPG. It enlarged the scope of private sector participation to almost all industrial sectors. In 1991, industrial policy contained the root of the liberalization, privatization and globalization drive made in the country in the later period. The policy has brought changes in the following aspects of industrial regulation. Number 1, industrial delicensing. Number 2, deregulation of the industrial sector. Number 3, public sector policy or dereservation and reform of public sector enterprises. Number 4, abolition of MRTP Act. Number 5, foreign investment policy and foreign technology policy. Let us look at the first reform, which is industrial delicensing policy. The most important part of the new industrial policy of 1991 was the end of the industrial licensing or the license Raj. Under the industrial licensing policies, private sector firms have to secure licenses to start an industry. This has created long delays in the startup of industries. It has reduced industrial licensing to 15 sectors. Now, only 13 sectors need license for starting an industrial operation. Reform number 2, deregulation of the industrial sector. Pre-reforms, the public sector had given reservation especially in the capital goods and key industries. Under industrial deregulation, most of the industrial sectors were open to the private sector as well. Most of the industrial sectors were reserved to the public sector. Under the new industrial policy, only 3 sectors, atomic energy, mining and railways, will continue as reserved for public sector. All other sectors have been opened for private sector participation. Reform number 3, reforms related to the public sector enterprises. Reforms in the public sector were aimed at enhancing efficiency and competitiveness of the sector. The government identified strategic and priority areas for the public sector to concentrate. Similarly, loss-making public sector enterprises were sold to the private sector. The government has adopted disinvestment policy for the restructuring of the public sector in the country, and at the same time autonomy has been given to public sector undertaking boards for efficient functioning. Reform number 4, foreign investment policy. Another major feature of the economic reform measure was it has opened gates to foreign investment and foreign technology. This measure has enhanced the industrial competition and improved business environment in the country. Foreign investment including foreign direct investment, popularly known as FDI, foreign portfolio investment, popularly known as FPI, and loan capital has also introduced in the country to attract foreign capital. Reform number 5, abolition of MRTP Act. The new industrial policy of 1991 has abolished the Monopoly and Restricted Trade Practice Act. In 2010, the Competition Commission has emerged as the watchdog in monitoring competitive practices in the economy. The industrial policy of 1991 is one of the biggest reforms introduced in Indian economy since independence. The policy caused big changes including emergence of a strong and competitive private sector and a sizable number of foreign companies in India. Now friends, let us have a look at growth and structure of India's foreign trade since 1990. Commencing July 1991, the Government of India has initiated a number of measures to open up the foreign trade sector and has announced massive import liberalization measures over the last decade. These include devaluation of the rupee in July 1991 and subsequently its depreciation against the currencies of leading industrialized countries, introduction of the convertibility of rupee first on trade account and then for all current account transactions, liberalization of import regime, substantial reduction in custom tariff rates, decanalizing of many items of trade, wide-ranging measures to give a thrust to exports, etc. In fact, the trade policy reforms initiated in 1991 have drastically changed the scenario and have resulted in a shift from the inward-oriented policy of the past to an outward-oriented policy. Now friends, let us have a look at expansion of foreign trade. India's trade has increased significantly in the post-reform period. In absolute terms, the trade volume rose from $42.2 billion US dollars, which is $18.1 billion in exports and $24.1 billion in imports in 1990-1991 to $762.7 billion US dollars, which is $312.62 billion in exports and $450.08 billion in imports in 2013-2014. However, since 1992-1993, the rate of increase of imports has been consistently higher than the rate of increase of exports excepting 1993, 2000 and 2001, 2002-2003, 2010-2011 and 2013 and 2014. As a result, trade deficit increased substantially from $1.5 billion in 1991-92 and $3.3 billion in 1992-1993 to as high as $12.8 billion in 1999-2000 and further to $190.34 billion in 2012-13. It fell to $137.46 billion in 2013-14. Important observations regarding India's trade performance during the post-reform period are: number 1, reflecting the liberalization of trade regime and the increasing external openness of the economy. India's trade GDP ratio showed substantial improvements in the post-1991 period as compared with the earlier decades. The export GDP ratio rose from 4.5% in 1970s, 1970-71 to 1979-80 and 4.6% in 1980s, which is 1980-81 to 1989-90, rose further to 17% in 2013-2014. The import GDP ratio also rose from 5.3% in 1970s to 7.2% in 1980s and further to 9.3% in 1990s. In 2013-14, the import GDP ratio was 24.8%. These data indicate an increasing openness of the Indian economy in the period since 1991, and given India's own economic past, represents a significant change in its relationship with the world economy. Number 2, the export-import ratio, which indicates the proportion of imports that can be financed from export earnings, increased substantially from 64% during 1980s to 84.9% during 1990s and stood at 81.7% in 2003-2004. However, it deteriorated thereafter and fell to 75% in 2004-2005 and 69% in 2013 and 14. Point number 3, both export growth and import growth rates registered an increase in the post-reform period vis-a-vis 1980s. For instance, the average annual export growth rate rose from 8.1% in 1980s to 8.6% in 1990s and further to 17.2% over the period of 2001 to 2013-2014, while the average annual import growth rate rose from 7.2% in 1980s to 9.6% in 1990s and further to 18.2% over the period of 2000-2001 to 2013-2014. Now friends, let us have a look at changes in composition of exports. Important changes have taken place in the composition of exports during the post-reform period. Number 1 being, the share of agriculture and allied products in total exports was 1/5 in 1990-91. This fell to 13.6% in 2013-2014. Point number 2, manufactured products account for a major share of the increase in aggregate exports over the period 1990-91 to 2013-2014. Point number 3, engineering goods occupied third place in India's export earnings in 1990-91 with a share of 11.9%. Since 2004-2005, they are in first position. Point number 4, petroleum products were only $528 million in 1990-1991 and in 2013-2014 they occupied second position in India's export earnings. Point number 5, exports of chemicals increased. An important reason behind this increase is rise in exports of drugs, pharmaceuticals and fine chemicals. Now friends, let us have a look at changes in composition of imports. Important observations regarding composition of India's imports and structural changes therein during the post-reform period. Point number 1, the most important import item in terms of expenditure is POL, standing for petroleum, oil and lubricants. The share of POL in total import expenditure was 25% in 1990-91 and 36.7% in 2013-14. In fact, for most of the post-reform period, POL imports have accounted for 1/4 or more than 1/4 of total import expenditure. A point that needs to be noted here is the compositional shifts within the broad level of aggregation during the last decade. For instance, within the petroleum imports, there has been a shift from import of petroleum products towards crude imports, following a large-scale increase of refinery capacity over time. Furthermore, India transformed itself from a net importer of finished petroleum products to net exporter of the same in 2001-2002. Point number 2, to meet the requirements of the gems and jewellery industry, which is an important export industry of the country, pearls and precious and semi-precious stones are imported in large quantities. These imports amounted to $2,083 million in 1990-91 and $23,863 million in 2013-2014. Point number 3, imports of capital goods at $5,833 million in 1990-91 accounted for 24.2%, that is almost 1/4, import expenditure in 1990-91. For most of the post-reform period, imports of capital goods have accounted for almost 1/4 of import expenditure. In 2013-2014, the total imports of $4,50,082 million, imports of capital goods were $81,178 million, that is 18.9% of total imports. Point number 4, as a result of liberalization of trade policy in the post-reform period, the changing consumer tastes, imports of electronic goods and computer goods have increased substantially during the recent years. During 1993-94, imports of electronic goods and computer goods were worth $930.4 million, which was just 4% of total import expenditure. In 2000-2001, their imports had risen to $3,694 million, which was 7.3% of their total imports expenditure. In 2013-14, imports of electronic goods and computer was $30,963 million, which was 6.9% of import expenditure. Point number 5, there has been a steep fall in the imports of project goods in recent period. The share of import of project goods in total import expenditure was 6.3% in 1998-99, which fell drastically to only 1% in 2013-2014. Point number 6, the share of fertilizers in import expenditure fell from 4.1% in 1990-91 to only 1.8% in 2012-2013. The share of iron and steel expenditure fell from 4.9% to 1.8% in 2013-14. Point number 7, the share of chemical elements and compounds in total import expenditure remained stable at 5 to 6% all through the period of 1990-91 to 2005-2006 and was 0.8% in 2013-2014. Point number 8, data on imports of gold and silver since 1990 and 2000 are now available. These data show that gold and silver imports were of $4,706 million in 1999-2000 and these rose to $55,794 million in 2012-2013. Percentage share of gold and silver in total import expenditure was 11.4% in 2012-2013. However, due to strict restrictions on imports of gold in 2013-14, the imports of gold and silver fell to $33,432 million in this year, which was 7.4% of total import expenditure. Now friends, let us have a look at foreign capital since 1990. Foreign capital did not flow in requisite quantity into India during the period of the first plan. The 1956 Industrial Policy Resolution opened up immense fields to foreign participation. In addition, trends grew towards liberalization slowly and gradually, and the role of foreign investment grew more and more important. NIP 1991 recognized the role of FDI in the process of industrial development in India in terms of bringing greater competitiveness and efficiency and also modernization, technological upgradation, creation a sound base for export promotion and above all integrating India with the rest of the world. Foreign capital can be obtained in either form. Number 1, concessional assistance foreign investment. Number 2, non-concessional foreign investment. Let us look at the first, which is concessional assistance, which includes grants and loans obtained at low rates of interest with long maturity. Number 2, non-concessional foreign investment includes mainly external commercial borrowings, loans from other government, deposits from non-residents. Foreign investment is generally in the form of private foreign participation in certain sectors of the domestic economy. New industrial policy was announced by the Government of India in July 1991 and the policy welcomed foreign investment and foreign technology. Since 1991, the country's policy on foreign investment is gradually evolving through the introduction of liberalization measures. Now friends, let us have a look at sectoral composition of foreign direct investment. Considering the sectoral composition of FDI over the period January 2000 to April 2008, the largest recipient of such investment was the services sector. Its share in cumulative FDI over the period was 20.2%, which is $13,519 million out of $66,938 million. Service sector was followed by number 1, computer software and hardware, whose share is 11.1%, telecommunication, whose share is 6%, construction, whose share is 5.1%, housing and real estate, whose share is 4.6%, automobile industry, whose share is 4.1%. In fact, these 6 sectors together accounted for a cumulative FDI of $34,167 million over the period of January 2000 to April 2008, which is 51%, that is more than half of total FDI received over the period. During 2013-14, FDI was mainly channeled into the manufacturing sector, 39.7%, followed by electricity and other generation, which is 8%, construction 7.9%, communication services at 7.8%, and retail and wholesale trade at 7.1%. Thus, these 5 sectors accounted for 70% of FDI's inflows in 2013-2014. The Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, popularly known as DIPP, issued Press Note 5, which is a part of 2016 series, on 24th June 2016, giving effect to FDI policy reforms announced on 20th June 2016. The major highlights of the newly announced policy are: number 1, 100% FDI permitted under government approval route for trading, including through e-commerce, in respect of food products manufactured and/or produced in India. Number 2, in defense, FDI beyond 49% permitted through government approval route in cases resulting in access to modern technology in the country or for other reasons to be reordered. Number 3, FDI limit for defense made applicable to manufacturing of small arms and ammunitions covered under Arms Act 1959. Number 4, 100% FDI under automatic route allowed in broadcasting carriage services. Number 5, 74% FDI under automatic route permitted in brownfield pharmaceuticals. Number 6, FDI beyond 74% under government approval in brownfield pharmaceuticals. Number 7, 100% FDI under automatic route permitted in brownfield airport projects. Number 8, FDI limit for scheduled air transport service or domestic scheduled passenger airline and regional air transport service raised to 100%. Number 9, FDI up to 49% under automatic route and FDI beyond 49% through government approval in air transport service or domestic scheduled passenger airline and regional air transport service. Number 10, foreign airlines would continue to be allowed to invest in capital of Indian companies operating scheduled and non-scheduled air transport services up to the limit of 49% of their paid up capital. Number 11, FDI limit for private security agencies raised to 74%. Number 12, FDI up to 49% allowed under automatic route and beyond 49% and up to 74% with government approval in private security agencies. Number 13, RBI permission not required for establishment of branch office, liaison office and project office or any other place of business in India if the principal business of the applicant is defense, telecom, private security or information and broadcasting. Number 14, local sourcing norms relaxed up to 3 years for entities undertaking single brand retail trading of products having state-of-the-art and cutting-edge technology. Number 15, FDI linked conditions removed for foreign investment in animal husbandry. Now friends, let us have a look at role of foreign capital in the growth and development. FDI has played a significant role in the development of our economy. Our GDP has been grown fourfold since the year 1991. According to the World Development Report of 2010, India ranked 3rd in terms of purchasing power parity. It is also the 10th largest economy in terms of US dollar exchange rate. Furthermore, India is also the 2nd fastest growing economy in the world with the highest economic growth rate. Though China is the largest recipient of FDI, but India is also increasingly becoming an important destination for FDI in Asia. Progressive liberalization of FDI policy has strengthened investor confidence with opening up of new sectors like integrated township, defense industry, tea plantation, etc. India's capacity as a host nation in attracting FDI has been enhanced during the post-reform period, but the quantum of FDI inflows relative to its size has been low as compared to the other developing countries. Main reasons for these low FDI inflow has been related to the investment climate, poor infrastructure, foreign exchange rate fluctuation and business facilitation, which are comparatively at lower level. However, during pre-liberalization period, FDI increased at 19.05%, while during post-liberalization period, it has grown 24.28%. This indicates that liberalization has had a positive impact on FDI inflows in India. Friends, now let us summarize this session. Pre-reforms, one of the major drawbacks in the industrial sector was inefficient functioning of the public sector, as it started incurring losses, leading to drain on the nation's limited resources. Therefore, new industrial policy was announced by the Government of India in July 1991. The new industrial policy of 1991 brought changes such as industrial delicensing, deregulation of the industrial sector, increased efficiency and competitiveness of public sector units, abolition of MRTP Act. The Government of India has initiated a number of measures to open up gates for foreign investment policy, foreign technology policy and the foreign trade sector through massive import liberalization measures over the last decade. There has been a shift from the inward-oriented policy of the past to an outward-oriented policy in the present. Through introduction of liberalization measures, foreign capital is also evolving gradually. Thank you, friends.